We trust the lamb, not the donkey or the elephant.
You know, I hesitate, given the debate about Keller and the Kellerites, to move into this line of questioning. But I do want to get your opinion. In the lead up to this book coming out, just the last year, and it's not that Keller hasn't faced critique from Christians and non-Christians throughout his career. He has, so there's nothing new on that front. It does seem like over the last year and a half, he's faced more critique from the inside, or at least from the people who you might expect to be in his camp. And part of that critique has been something to this effect. Once upon a time, we lived in a world that respected Christians and shared kind of normal, traditional Christian moral values. And eventually that world gave way to a time when maybe morally, traditionally, we'd left behind those morals, but Christians were still viewed with some respect. They were kind of viewed neutrally. It's not a good thing, not a bad thing. You just are who you are. And now we've entered a moment where Christians are, by and large, rejected, and their vision of the good life, their vision of what it looks like to live together is rejected. Not just as not good for me, but as unhealthy and bad for society. And thinkers along these veins have said that Tim Keller is representative of a former world. And the reason why he could be so gentle and ironic and avoid some of the hot cultural issues of the day, which I don't know that he actually did avoid them, but let's just go with the argument here for a second, is because he was living in a different era, and a new era calls for a new response, a more muscular response, a more public-facing Christianity that is trying to shape government and politics. And so I'm just curious. I mean, as you read Tim Keller, I mean, obviously I don't think you're going to say, yeah, I think his model is outmoded. How does Tim Keller's style of ministry and cultural apologetics, how does it apply to the new moment we're in? Or would you say, you know what, this moment really isn't that different? And I just want to get your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, one of the last time I saw Tim in person, because the interviews we did were like this over Zoom or phone or email or text. Last time I saw him was December of 2019. And this is, 5 months before his cancer diagnosis and 3 months before the world shut down. And he said, it just kind of sat back, and this was just kind of a general thought. He said, I'm not sure how much I did is really going to be very applicable for you guys today. He said, I'm talking with my granddaughter, and she is just not growing up in the same New York that I came to in 1989. He said, New York was rough. the crime, secularism. I mean, you've only got, from what I could talk to people, 4 evangelical churches in Manhattan at the time. It was I talk in the book about New York's history and about how it was the evangelical capital of America in the 19th century. In the 20th century, there's a shift toward the liberal, quote unquote, liberal evangelical. They toss out a lot of biblical authority and the miracles. And then by the post-war period, it basically just is gone. It's effectively gone. And so clearly it's a pretty secular place when he gets there. Actually, I point out in the book that it's roughly about the same level of national no religion secularism today as it was in Manhattan at the time. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the point, that none of the difficulties and opposition to Christianity is remotely new or novel to Tim. So it doesn't make any sense to look at his model of ministry as one that was for a place that was positively disposed toward Christianity. I guess maybe if he'd stayed at Hopewell, but even his model of ministry at Hopewell was nothing like, we just need that good old-time Southern religion. So in fact, I loved talking in there about Bill Hill, this amazing renegade Presbyterian pastor who wouldn't allow flag-draped caskets to come into his church with World War II veterans. Stuff like that, and forced his church to be his church and his school to be integrated in the 40s in Virginia. That was decades away from the Supreme Court decision that would legalize interracial marriage. So I like to because there's always this evangelical edge with Tim of trying to reach people with the gospel, but at the same time needing to stand against sin and preaching judgment and not going with the currents of culture. So I think at some level, Tim must be a kind of avatar for people of what they imagine to be true as a kind of intellectual ministry foil, or even like intra-denominational foil for them, because it plainly doesn't represent an understanding of his actual life or his actual circumstances. Now, I'm a different generation from Tim, about the age of his sons, and I don't think it would really be fair for me to go back and kind of pick, well, this is what I would have done if I'd been Tim Keller. What I can say is that I don't really think it's an option for leaders to whisper or to be quiet about things like transgender changes. In fact, it's one reason why I've been so privately and publicly supportive of the work that you've done on that topic with your local school system, as well as abortion. And so in that regard, I just don't. I'm definitely in the camp of J.D. Greer, the article that we published about him, that you cannot be silent about these things with the younger generations. You got to go after them head on. Now, he was critiquing Andy Stanley in that case, but Andy Stanley and Tim Keller are not the same in terms of their methodologies and their missiologies. They are definitely not in the same ballpark there. So I wonder if people would just attribute thoughts to Tim as this kind of target that are not actually true of what he's done, or perhaps maybe they have had encounters with people who have been influenced by Tim in some way who do exhibit that problem. So maybe that's the case. So it's a long answer to say in the end that even Tim himself has admitted that things have changed. He didn't begin to admit that because he suddenly woke up one day and read a First Things article. So that's definitely not the case. He's been dealing with this his whole life. I do think that that this time does demand very explicit teaching. And I'll come back, on social issues, but I have to say, running them through a political grid and a partisan grid makes very little sense in terms of an understanding of how cultures actually change. And evangelicals continue to be absolutely obsessed with political power as, I guess, the only thing left for them, the only lever for them left to be able to pull because of their populist might. That translates because of the over-representation in certain rural states, the Electoral College, I guess, but that doesn't, and I'm grateful for Supreme Court justices who make the right decisions, like with Dobbs, but it is a relatively short-term way to think about cultural change. And then the last thing I'll say is that Tim, one of the oddest critiques I think of him is people saying, well, the problem with him is that he focuses on evangelism. He runs everything through the grid of evangelism. And I guess at one level, I want to say that's actually kind of true. I think he really does run things through the grid of evangelism. At the same time, one of the things that Tim has said to me, including on the podcast I do, Life and Books and Everything, he said, what alternatives do we have evangelistically? Is this new political program on the right or the left? Is it consistent with evangelism? I don't see that. And so on the one level, I'm thinking, no, we shouldn't run everything in the church through the grid of evangelism. At the same time, what does it actually say about us if we're not considering the evangelistic implications here? Well, at the very least, it probably means you're not really thinking about these things as an evangelical, right or wrong, but Tim is definitely an evangelical. I think it's really weird to say to an evangelical, you think too much about things from the perspective of an evangelist. I don't know where you've been for the last 50 years. That's who he is. He's an evangelist.
Yeah.
So what do you expect him to say?
I think
that was a long answer.
No, it's a long answer, and it's a helpful answer. my only interaction with Tim has been digital, and once upon a time he retweeted me, so I thought, okay, I can die a happy man. You joked that there was something. Oh, he taught a class with Ed Clown. And he thought, okay, now I can die a happy man. I felt the same way when Tim Keller retweeted
That's
me.
right.
But what I had said in the tweet was, well, first of all, I said if you can't tell the difference between Tim Keller and Andy Stanley, you're either dishonest or not paying attention. But then I moved on and I said the thing about any structure of a church or any missiology is that it's improvisational, right? You have to fit the improv to the moment, and every cultural moment, every new generation requires a new missionary encounter. And what I appreciate so deeply about Tim and reading your biography was that it gave me a refreshed framework for how to engage a new cultural moment, which is different than the moment that he lived in many ways. I mean, like you said, our demographics are actually similar to the world he lived in, which is why I think we can pay a lot of attention. I mean, we're basically in New York in 1989, but there's differences. We live in a digital age. I mean, there's so many differences that we have to accommodate for. And that's what I found so helpful about the book, and why I just want to, anybody who's listening to this, go read this book or listen to it. You did a great job on the audiobook.
Thank you.
Go pick it up, because I think what you're going to get is maybe not the play-by-play of Tim Keller's life. Instead, what you're going to get is, jokingly, the bibliography, the influences that shaped him into the kind of person that he is. And I think that's so important, because we do need a framework to have a fresh missionary encounter with a new age, in a new age with a new generation. And I think Tim can point us to the thinkers, the leaders who can help us become that and help shape us into the next generation of thinkers and leaders. And that's why I love, again, just to encourage you about what you're doing at the Keller Center. I find it so fascinating. Most leaders have thought they need to pass a baton to one person. This will be my replacement. And when I look at the Keller Center, I think, one, it represents a very decentralized age where we have all of these people who are now kind of carrying forward the baton of Tim Keller. But even more importantly, here's a guy who has synthesized so many different thinkers into a coherent vision. And so is it a shocker that if he's going to pass his legacy forward, it's going to go to many people who together can synthesize a different vision of ministry? And so I'm just excited. So if you're listening to this, go check out Collin's I keep saying autobiography. It's not a biography of Tim Keller. And make sure to go check out the Keller Center and the essays that are going to be coming out of there. I've read some already and interacted with some of the people there, and I'm just thrilled to see what you're doing and what's going to come out of this in the future.
I'm Patrick. Thanks for watching this video. If you're passionate about ending tribalism in the church and giving Jesus your allegiance, you're not alone. We have a podcast and a book. They're both called Truth Over Tribe. You can download the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can buy the book on Amazon. I hope you'll check them out.